The day my son-in-law stood in my kitchen and told me to pack my things, I was holding a casserole dish I'd owned for 31 years. It was the same dish I'd used to bring meals to my neighbors after funerals, after surgeries, after new babies came home from the hospital. Blue speckled enamel with a small chip on the left handle from the time I dropped it moving into this house in 1991. I set it down very carefully on the counter. I looked at him, and I said, "I see." He didn't expect that. People like Derek never do. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story didn't start the morning he came into my kitchen with that folder. It started 3 years before, when my daughter brought him home for Christmas, and he shook my hand like he was doing me a favor. My name is Louise Ann Whitfield. I'm 64 years old. I taught 4th grade at Ridgecrest Elementary in Asheville, North Carolina for 27 years. I retired early when my husband passed, because the grief sat in my chest like a stone, and I couldn't stand in front of a classroom of 9-year-olds and pretend the world made sense anymore. My husband, Frank, died in March 2020. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to gone. We'd been married 38 years. Frank was a civil engineer with the county. Quiet man, steady. He was the kind of person who read the fine print on everything, who kept every receipt in a labelled accordion folder, who said, "Let me think about that," before agreeing to anything. We were different that way. I was the talker, he was the thinker. Together we made sense. After he died, the house in Ridgecrest felt enormous. It's a 4-bedroom craftsman on about 2 acres backing up to the woods. We bought it in 1991 for $112,000. Frank had spent 20 years upgrading every inch of it. New roof, finished basement, wraparound porch he built by hand over 2 summers. He loved that porch. I loved that porch because it was his. My daughter Amber was 32 when her father died. She'd been living in Charlotte with her boyfriend at the time, the boyfriend before Derek. She drove up immediately when we got the diagnosis, and barely left until after the funeral. We were always close, Amber and me. She used to fall asleep in my bed during thunderstorms, well into her teenage years. I never minded. 6 months after Frank passed, she called me on a Sunday night, voice careful the way it gets when she's about to say something she's rehearsed. "Mom, I want you to meet someone." His name was Derek. Derek Paul Haynes, 38 years old, sales director for a medical device company. He drove a leased BMW and had the kind of handshake that's slightly too firm, like he read about it in a book. He came to Christmas dinner that first year with a very expensive bottle of wine and spent most of the evening asking questions about the house. How many square feet, what the property taxes were, whether the land behind us was protected. I noticed. I told myself I was being unfair. They got engaged 8 months later. The ring was beautiful. I'll give him that. He took Amber to Savannah for the weekend and proposed at some rooftop restaurant overlooking the river. She texted me a photo from the table, her face lit up like a child's. I cried happy tears looking at it. I wanted to be happy. I was trying. They got married the following October, small wedding at a vineyard outside Hendersonville. Amber wore a dress she found at a consignment shop and altered herself, which I loved. She's always been practical that way. Derek's family came up from Atlanta. His parents, a brother, a few cousins. They were polite in the way that keeps a distance. In February of the next year, Amber called again with another rehearsed voice. "Mum, we're having a hard time with the housing market. Everything in Charlotte is it's insane right now. We were wondering if maybe, just for a little while, we could stay with you. Save up. Get our footing." I told her yes before she finished the sentence. Of course I did. She was my daughter. The house was too quiet. I thought having them there would help me stop waking up at 3 a.m. reaching for Frank's side of the bed. That was my first mistake. Not saying yes without asking a single question. They moved in with 2 carloads of furniture, 14 boxes, and a storage unit's worth of things that took over my garage within a week. Amber was her same self. She cooked with me, helped in the garden, sat on Frank's porch with me in the evenings drinking decaf. Those parts were good. Those parts I don't regret. Derek was different in my house than he'd been at Christmas dinners. Smaller courtesies disappeared. He stopped saying thank you for meals. He'd come home from work and go straight to the finished basement. They'd set it up as their suite, without so much as a word. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me the kind of answer that technically responds to the question, but communicates clearly that he'd rather not be asked. After about 6 months, the comments started. Louise, have you thought about what you're doing with all this space? It's a lot for one person. This kitchen could really use updating. The appliances are older than Amber. You know, property values in this area have jumped. Have you had anyone come out to assess what this place is actually worth now? I let it go. Amber was happy. Or she seemed happy. I told myself I was imagining things. The year turned. Then another. Then another. 3 years suddenly had passed. They were still in my basement. Derek had gotten a raise. He mentioned it often enough that I lost count. Amber had started a bookkeeping business from home, built it up slowly, and it was doing well. They took 2 vacations, Turks and Caicos 1 year, a cruise through the Caribbean the next. They came home with tons of new luggage and talked about the restaurants they'd eaten at, while I sat at my kitchen table, eating reheated soup. I never once asked them for rent. I was their family. That was my second mistake, confusing generosity with clarity. They never knew where my boundaries were because I never told them. I kept thinking they would eventually do the right thing on their own. They didn't. It was a Tuesday morning in March. I was making oatmeal and had the back door open because the air finally smelled like spring, that green, wet smell I've loved since childhood. Derek came upstairs earlier than usual, already dressed for work, and set a folder on my kitchen table. "We need to talk," he said. Amber wasn't with him. I noticed that. She was still downstairs. He pulled out a chair across from me and sat down like he was running a meeting. He'd printed things, organized them in a folder with a cover sheet. A cover sheet. In my kitchen. Amber and I have been offered a really strong opportunity, he said. There's a new development going in on the east side of Asheville, Ridgewood Reserve. 5-bedroom homes starting in the low 9s. It's everything we've been waiting for. I said that sounded wonderful. I asked when they were thinking of buying. That's the thing, he said. He opened the folder. We've done the math, and honestly, Louise, with what this property is worth now, we had it assessed last month. You're sitting on somewhere around $850,000 of real estate. For one person. I set down my spoon. Amber and I have been talking about this for a while. You don't need all this space. You're not using the basement, obviously, and the 2 upstairs guest rooms are just sitting there. The maintenance alone, the yard, the roof inspection we had done last fall, it's a lot for someone your age. Someone your age. There's a wonderful community in Weaverville, he continued. He pulled out a printed brochure. He'd already printed a brochure, Laurel Pine Senior Living, independent living, not assisted. You'd have your own apartment, 1 bedroom, a little patio. They have a garden club, a fitness center. It's actually quite nice. The monthly fee is $2,800. I looked at the brochure. I looked at the cover sheet on his folder. I looked at the kitchen around me, the blue speckled casserole dish, the herbs growing in the window Frank had built for me, the crack in the backsplash tile I'd always meant to fix and then decided I liked because I remembered the morning it happened. And this house, I asked? We'd move up from the basement, rent out the other 2 bedrooms, maybe the whole place eventually. In this market, you're looking at $4,000 a month, easy. That would cover most of the mortgage on Ridgewood Reserve. He said it like he was describing a business deal that benefited all parties. Efficient, clean, sensible. Where is Amber? I asked. Something shifted in his face. She's downstairs. She agrees this is the right move, Louise. We've talked about it at length. I'd like to hear that from her. He didn't like that, but he went to the top of the basement stairs and called her up. She came into the kitchen, not quite looking at me. She got herself a glass of water she didn't drink. She stood near the counter. Amber, I said, is this what you want? She looked at her husband first. That's the thing I'll remember for the rest of my life. She looked at him before she answered me. Mum, it makes sense financially. You'd be in a community with people your own age. Derek and I could really make something of this property. This is my home, I said. We know that, Derek said, and we're not asking you to walk away from the equity. If you move to Laurel Pines, we'll handle the property expenses. You can keep all of Frank's accounts. We're just asking for the house itself. Just the house. The house Frank built that porch on? The house where Amber had her first nightmare and came running down the hall in footy pajamas. The house where I'd sat on the kitchen floor the night Frank was diagnosed and couldn't get up for an hour. Just the house. I picked up my oatmeal bowl. I rinsed it in the sink. I folded the dish towel and hung it back on the oven handle, exactly as Frank always had, the pattern facing out. I'll think about it, I said, and I walked down the hall to Frank's office and closed the door. I could hear Derek in the kitchen saying something to Amber in a low, satisfied voice. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. I sat in Frank's chair. He'd had it since graduate school. Cracked brown leather with one arm repaired with electrical tape. And I let myself feel it. The rage, the grief, the absurdity, all of it. I let it move through me for about 10 minutes. Then I opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Frank had a system. Every document we'd ever needed, organized by category, labeled in his small, careful handwriting. Property, insurance, financial, medical, legal, estate. I started with property. The deed to our house was purchased June 14th, 1991. Listed owners, Francis Gerald Whitfield and Louise Ann Whitfield, as joint tenants with right of survivorship. When Frank died, his share transferred automatically to me. His name was no longer on this deed. My name was the only name on this deed. I don't know what Derek had been told, or what he'd assumed, or whether he'd actually seen the document, or just the old mortgage statement that still had both our names on it. But whatever he based his plan on, it wasn't the actual deed. I pulled out the financial folder next. Frank, as I said, was a thorough man. There were statements I hadn't opened since he died. Our financial advisor, a woman named Carolyn Reeves who'd been working with us since 1998, had been sending quarterly reports to an email address I barely checked. I'd filed the paper statements in this drawer without looking at them. The grief had made numbers feel irrelevant. We had enough. That was all I needed to know. I started reading. By the time I'd worked through everything, it was dark outside. I'd missed lunch. I didn't notice. Frank's pension from the county. $2,200 a month, transferable to surviving spouse, which I had been receiving all along, deposited automatically. His life insurance payout, $400,000, which Carolyn had invested in 2020. Our joint investment account started in 1987 and added to every year since, now worth approximately $1.4 million. The house assessed independently by me the following morning when I called a realtor friend named Joanne, worth between $800,000 and $850,000 in the current market, consistent with what Derek had said, the one true thing in his folder. Total assets, somewhere north of $2 million, not including the pension or my own teacher's retirement, which paid me $1,800 a month. I thought about what Derek had said. You're sitting on a lot for one person. He had no idea how much he was right. I also found something else in Frank's files, something that made the whole picture sharper. In the folder labeled Legal Estate, behind the deed and the will, there was a document I'd forgotten existed. Frank had drawn it up with our attorney, a man named Howard Gatch, in 2019, when he got sick. A durable power of attorney designating me as sole authority over all property and financial decisions. And beneath that, a letter Frank had written in his own handwriting, addressed to no one in particular, titled simply Notes on the House. He'd written it when he knew he was dying. Louise, if you ever feel pressured to leave Ridgecrest, read this first. The house is paid off. It's yours entirely. You don't owe anyone an explanation for staying in your own home. Don't let anyone make you feel like a burden for taking up space you've earned. You've earned everything in this house, every square foot. I read it twice. Then I called Howard Gatch. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me. It was nearly 8 p.m. I apologized for the hour. He told me not to be silly and to tell him what was happening. I told him everything. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Louise, he said, you own that house outright. No mortgage, no liens, Frank's name removed from title upon his death. Derek has no legal claim, no standing, and no right to ask you to leave. What he's described is not a business arrangement. It's an attempt to take your property. Can he do it if I agree? He can do anything if you agree. That's why you're not going to agree. And Louise, I need to ask you something. Has Derek seen the actual deed recently? Do you know where his information is coming from? I thought about it. Derek had said we had it assessed. He'd known the square footage, the acreage. He had a brochure for a senior living community that took time to obtain. He printed the cover sheet. He planned this, I said. It looks that way. The question is how long. I went back to Frank's desk after I hung up. I started going through 3 years of small details I'd dismissed. Derek's questions about property values on the night we first met. The way he'd asked Gus last spring whether I'd ever thought about adding Amber to the deed, for simplicity's sake. The property assessment he'd arranged without telling me. I found the assessor's business card tucked in a kitchen drawer 3 weeks ago and didn't think anything of it at the time. I thought about it now. I also went through Derek's things, not proudly. But I went through them. In the filing cabinet they kept in the corner of the basement, I found their mortgage pre-approval letter. Ridgewood Reserve, as advertised. Monthly payment on a $900,000 home, approximately $5,800. Property taxes in that area, around $1,400 a month. Insurance, utilities, HOA fees. Derek made good money, but not that money, unless someone was providing supplemental income. $4,000 a month, say, from a rental property. I found their credit card statements too, 3 years of them. I added up 6 months. Amber's bookkeeping business was real, but Derek's spending was not the spending of someone saving for a house. Restaurants I'd never heard of, watches. A ski trip to Colorado last February, booked while I sat in this house alone for a week thinking they were visiting his family. I sat on the floor of their basement in the dark and understood something clearly. This was not impulsive. Derek had been building toward this since he first walked into my kitchen and asked what the property taxes were. Whether Amber had known from the beginning, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure I wanted to know yet. The next morning I called Carolyn Reeves, my financial advisor. She came to the house that afternoon. She'd always been that kind of advisor, the kind who comes to you. I showed her everything. She went through it methodically. When she finished, she looked up at me over her reading glasses. You know what I want to say, and I'm going to say it anyway. You are in an extremely strong position. You have no debt. You have liquid assets most people never see. You have a fully paid property at peak value. And you have a pension and retirement income that covers your living expenses without touching any principal. You could live another 30 years and be fine. I know that now, I said. Did Derek know? No. He thought I was a retired school teacher living on Frank's social security. She almost smiled. What are you going to do? I'm going to handle it, but I need you there when I do. I called Howard that night and we made a plan. I called my sister Nadine in Relay and asked her to drive up Friday and stay through the weekend. I didn't explain everything on the phone. I just said I needed her. Nadine has known me for 62 years. She said she'd be there by noon. I did not tell Amber or Derek anything. I moved through the next 2 days normally. I made dinner. I asked about their days. I watered Frank's roses on the porch. I was very calm. I have learned at 64 that calm is the most powerful thing a woman can be when someone is trying to frighten her. Friday, Nadine arrived with a pound cake and a look on her face that said she already suspected something significant. We sat in Frank's office, door closed, and I showed her everything. The deed, the financial statements, the credit card bills, the mortgage pre-approval, the timeline I'd written out in Frank's old legal pad. When she got to the ski trip in February, she set the paper down. He took my niece to Colorado while you sat here alone. Yes, and Amber went along with all of this. I don't know everything Amber knew. That's part of what I need to figure out. Nadine picked up the legal pad again. She's retired law enforcement, 30 years with the sheriff's office in Wake County, finished as a lieutenant. She reads documents the way most people read menus. This is financial elder abuse, she said. Under North Carolina law, that's a felony. Howard said the same thing. Are you pressing charges? I don't know yet. That depends on some things I still need to learn. What do you need from me? I need you to be my witness, and I need you to be in the room Monday morning. Nadine nodded once. Tell me what time. Monday. Derek was dressed for work when he came upstairs and found me sitting at the kitchen table with Nadine, Howard, and Carolyn. He stopped in the doorway. I've thought about that moment a lot since. The moment he saw the table and understood that something had gone wrong with his plan. Derek, I said, come sit down. We have some things to go over. He looked at the folder in front of Howard. He looked at the laptop Carolyn had open. He looked at Nadine, who was looking at him the way she'd looked at people in interrogation rooms for 30 years. He sat down. Howard opened without preamble. He's 70 years old and has no patience for theatre. Derek, Louise has been made aware of your proposal to have her vacate this property. I want to address the legal situation directly so there's no confusion going forward. He slid the deed across the table. This is the deed to the property at 4417 Ridgecrest Road. Sole owner, Louise Ann Whitfield. Frank's name was removed upon his death per the joint tenancy agreement. You have no legal interest in this property. You have no right to rent it, sell it, profit from it, or ask Louise to leave it. Any attempt to do so would constitute civil fraud and potentially elder financial abuse, which in North Carolina is prosecuted as a felony under GS 14 to 112.2. Derek's jaw moved. No sound came out. I also want to address something else, Howard continued. He pulled out a second document. You arranged a property assessment of this home without Louise's knowledge or consent. You represented to Louise that you had discussed this plan with Amber at length, that it was a mutual decision, and that Louise's cooperation was essentially a formality. This constitutes misrepresentation with the intent to deprive an owner of her property. I was trying to help her, Derek said. His voice had recovered enough to function. Louise is alone in a house that's too big for her. We were thinking of her. Nadine spoke for the first time. You booked a ski trip to Breckenridge in February. Louise was here alone that week. You told her you were visiting your parents in Atlanta. Derek looked at her. I spent 30 years in law enforcement, Nadine said pleasantly. I know what thinking of someone looks like. This isn't it. Carolyn opened her laptop and turned it to face him. She walked him through the numbers the same way she'd walked me through them. Investment accounts, pension, retirement income, the house value, total assets. Louise is not a widow in need of rescue, Carolyn said. She is a woman of significant independent means who was apparently not aware of the full scope of those means, and neither, evidently, were you. You made plans to take her property based on the assumption that she was financially vulnerable. She is not. Derek looked at the screen for a long moment. Something moved through his face. Not remorse, not exactly. More like recalculation. I want to talk to Amber, he said. Amber is welcome to join us, I said. It was the first time I'd spoken since he sat down. But I want to say something first. I looked at my son-in-law. Not with anger. I'd moved past anger sometime around Saturday afternoon. What I felt now was something cooler and steadier. I welcomed you into my home because you were Amber's husband. I asked nothing from you in return. For 3 years I made meals, shared space, tried to know you. You spent that time planning how to remove me from a house I've owned for 33 years. You underestimated me because I'm a 64-year-old retired schoolteacher who grows tomatoes and goes to bed at 10 o'clock. That was your mistake, not mine. He started to say something. I'm not finished, I said. He stopped. I'm not pressing charges today. I'm not suing you today. What I am doing is giving you 30 days to find other housing. 30 days, not 4, because I am not you. You can take whatever is yours, and Amber can take whatever is hers, and when you're gone, I'm going to open every window in this house and let the spring air in. I stood up. If Amber wants to speak with me, she knows where I am. Alone. Without you in the room. She came upstairs 20 minutes later. Derek had gone to work. I heard the BMW pull out of the driveway faster than usual. Amber sat across from me at the kitchen table. She'd been crying. I gave her a tissue and waited. How much did you know? I asked. Not with accusation. I genuinely needed to understand. She was quiet for a long time. I knew we were going to ask you to move. I didn't know about the cover sheet. I didn't know he'd had the house assessed without telling you. She looked at her hands. I knew it was wrong, and I let him convince me it was practical. Why? She cried harder. Because I wanted the house in Ridgewood Reserve. I wanted the life he was describing. I told myself you'd be okay, that you'd adjust. I told myself it was logical. She looked up. I never thought about what it would mean to you, what this house means. I stopped thinking about it. I looked at my daughter, at the person I'd sat up with through fevers and heartbreaks and the week she didn't get into her first-choice college and thought the world had ended. I thought about Frank's letter in the filing cabinet. You've earned everything in this house. I love you, I said. That's not in question. But I need you to understand something. I am not a problem to be managed. I'm not a resource to be allocated. I am your mother, and I am a person, and this is my home, and if you want to be in my life going forward, you need to decide what that actually means to you. She nodded. She couldn't speak. Take the 30 days, I said, and think. They were gone in 22. I don't know exactly what happened between them in those 3 weeks. Amber called twice. Short calls, practical things. Could she take the bookshelf from the guest room? Had she left her grandmother's mixing bowls in the back of the pantry? I said yes to the bookshelf. I kept the mixing bowls. 6 months have passed now. I'm sitting on Frank's porch with my coffee, and the morning is doing that thing it does in late September in the mountains, where the light comes through the trees at an angle that makes everything look like it's been dipped in honey. Amber called last week, not about logistics, just to call. We talked for 45 minutes about her bookkeeping clients, about a novel I was reading, about a memory we both had of Frank teaching her to drive a stick shift in an empty parking lot when she was 16. She laughed at the memory. I cried a little, but the good kind. She and Derek are separated. She told me matter-of-factly, the way she's always delivered hard news, clean and direct. She said she'd been seeing a therapist. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking about the difference between the life she'd wanted and the life she'd actually been living. I didn't say anything about Derek. It wasn't my place. She asked if she could come for Thanksgiving. I said yes before she finished the question. I think about what I would have said to myself 3 years ago when she first called with that rehearsed voice asking if they could stay just for a while. I would have said say yes, but ask the questions. Say yes, but know your own ground before you invite anyone else onto it. Don't confuse love with legibility. The people who love you should be able to see you clearly, not just what they need from you. I didn't know any of that then. Frank knew it. He wrote it down in a letter I almost never found. I open the porch door and step out into the September morning. The rose bushes Frank planted along the fence are making one last effort before winter, a few late blooms going orange at the edges. I have my coffee. I have this house. I have 33 years of small repairs and chosen colours, and a chip on a casserole dish that tells the story of one ordinary Tuesday in 1994. I have myself. Finally and fully, I have myself. And it turns out that's more than enough. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical way, just in the ordinary, kitchen table way that comes when you've lived long enough to watch things come full circle. Derek walked into my home with a plan. He'd been building it quietly for years. Every question about property taxes, every casual comment about square footage, every suggestion that I might be more comfortable somewhere smaller, none of it was idle conversation. It was construction. He was building something, and I was the obstacle he needed to move. And here's what I've come to understand. The plan failed not because I was lucky, or because someone intervened at the right moment. It failed because of choices Derek made one by one over a long stretch of time. He chose to underestimate me. He chose to assume that because I'd spent my life in a classroom and a garden instead of a boardroom, I didn't understand how the world worked. He chose to believe that grief had made me soft all the way through. Every one of those choices was a brick in a wall he was building, and when the moment came, that wall fell on him, not on me. That's the thing about treating people as less than they are. It doesn't just diminish them, it blinds you. Derek never really saw me. He saw a retired school teacher in a big house. He saw an asset and an inconvenience. He never once considered that the quiet woman growing tomatoes on the back porch might have 38 years of careful, deliberate living behind her, and documentation of every bit of it in a locked file drawer. I think about Amber differently. Her situation was harder to look at, honestly. Derek's choices were calculated. Hers came from somewhere more human and more painful. She wanted something, and she let that wanting override what she knew to be right. I understand that. I've wanted things badly enough to look away from inconvenient truths. Most people have. The difference is whether you catch yourself before the damage is done, or after. She caught herself after. That's harder. It takes more courage to turn around once you've already gone somewhere wrong than to simply not go there in the first place. I won't pretend the turning around erases what happened. It doesn't, but it means something. It means she has more in her than the worst moment she's been part of. What I keep coming back to is Frank's letter. He wrote it when he knew he was dying, when he had every reason to think about what he was leaving behind and who might try to take it. He wasn't thinking about real estate values or legal language. He was thinking about real estate values or legal language. He was thinking about whether the person he'd spent 38 years building a life with would be able to hold her ground when someone pushed. He thought I could. He wrote it down. I think the most important thing I've learned, not from this situation but from the whole long arc of a life, is that your strength doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. Every year you live with integrity. Every decision you make from a place of honesty rather than fear. Every time you do the quiet right thing when no one is watching, it builds. You don't always know it's there. Sometimes it takes someone trying to take everything from you before you discover what you've actually got. I had more than I knew, in every sense of that word. And I'm sitting on Frank's porch in the September light, and I am not winding down, I am not diminishing. I am right here, fully present, in a life that belongs entirely to me. That's not luck. That's the sum of a lot of ordinary days lived with care.